Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Superhuman Entrepreneur. I'm your host, Dr. Matt Accurso, and today I get to interview an amazing man, an individual who's making big waves in the entrepreneur world. His name is Matt Bodnar, and he's been named a rising restaurateur star by the National Restaurant Association and a strategy pro by Restaurant Hospitality magazine. He's also a partner at an investment firm called Fresh Hospitality. He's also the creator and host of The Science of Success, a #1 new and noteworthy podcast about psychology and decision-making. And get this, just the icing on the cake, he's been rated Forbes 30 under 30. So absolutely dominating in his space. Matt, thanks so much for being on with us today.
Well, Matt, thanks for having me on the show. It's super exciting to be here.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. You know, we were just talking about Nashville and the amazing place that it is. You know, why'd you choose Nashville? Is there a special something about the city?
I grew up in Nashville, and out of college, I worked in New York up on Wall Street for a number of years and kind of wound my way entrepreneurially back to Nashville, which I'm happy to kind of tell the story of how I made that decision and what went into that thought process. But basically, about a little less than 7 years ago, I quit my job at Goldman Sachs and moved back to Nashville to get involved in sort of a startup company that was a restaurant investment firm called Fresh Hospitality. And since then, we've grown dramatically and done a lot of different stuff.
Wow. So tell us a little bit about Fresh Hospitality.
So Fresh is fundamentally an investment vehicle that invests kind of across the food value spectrum. So we invest in and operate businesses, everything from sort of farming and agriculture, and we're doing some really cool stuff in vertical farming and kind of ag tech, which is one of the growing areas of our portfolio, to restaurant operations are kind of a huge component of what we do. We own and operate a number of restaurant brands, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a second. And then commercial real estate development is another huge piece of our portfolio. We do a lot of real estate investing, both kind of in and around the hospitality world and also outside of it. And then we have a number of investments in sort of secondary service companies that service and support the portfolio companies we invest in. So things like technology, accounting, marketing, et cetera. And within the restaurant bucket, which is really the largest sort of bucket of what we do, we have about 18 different restaurant brands comprising about 180 locations, and primarily kind of based in the Southeast, but our geographic footprint technically is coast to coast. But if you looked at kind of an 80-20 principle sort of breakdown of the portfolio, I'd say 80% of it's in the Southeast broadly.
Wow, very cool. And so, you know, throughout your journey, obviously, there's been bumps in the road. You've been in the valley, you've climbed the mountaintop to where you are. You know, tell us a story of what's blocked your performance and your productivity in the past. And maybe it's, you know, just a certain situation in your life. And I think this is important for everybody out there to hear because, you know, Matt obviously is doing very well for himself, very successful, Forbes list 30 under 30. And oftentimes we can see this highlight reel and not think about the fact that it took you climbing and it took you facing, you know, stress and challenges and overcoming. And so share with us a little bit of that story.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple different challenges that I could kind of share. You know, on the business side, I think there's two that are really, I think, the most relevant. On the business side, I've definitely had a number of failed companies, failed businesses, projects where I've lost tens of thousands of dollars in sort of funding companies that ended up completely imploding. And I can tell you about two of those. And then on the personal side as well, I've battled back from sort of a dark place in my life and really found, do a lot of work around emotional intelligence, emotional development, and really dealt with my own anxiety and problems around that and kind of overcame a really traumatic period in my life. And so I can kind of go through either one of those.
Wow.
Which one do you want to start with?
Man, let's go through the dark side of, you know, learning the emotional intelligence and that side of things. So I think that's really important. I think a lot of us deal with that side of things, and that's more of the shameful side, right? Oftentimes we don't want to be transparent, especially as men, because you know we want to show that we got it all together. But I think this is a really important conversation for the audience. So let's go there.
So it kind of started out, you know, I've always had like a very active mind, and even to the sense of like if I kind of dug into it, it seemed like sort of borderline OCD, sort of just mental tendencies in general. And I had this sort of traumatic event happen in my life 3 or 4 years ago where I witnessed the death of one of my family members. Like they
Wow.
choked to death while they were having
Oh,
dinner
wow.
with me
Okay.
and some of our other family members. So it was like really traumatic, but it didn't hit me sort of right away. Maybe like 3 or 4 weeks after that, I had like a massive panic attack. And then a couple weeks after that, I had another panic attack, and I couldn't really figure out like what was causing this. And eventually I started doing a ton of sort of work on my own about thinking about how to deal with anxiety, how to deal with panic attacks, how to deal with stress, and all these different pieces of the puzzle. And fortunately, that coincided with kind of the beginning of my podcast, The Science of Success. And I was able to use that almost as a laboratory to interview a ton of experts, neuroscientists, therapists, psychologists, around a lot of the things about what causes, anxiety. How do you battle back from it? What about the sort of physical habits and things like exercise and diet that impact your brain and the neurochemical balance in your brain, and whether you're in sort of the sympathetic nervous system or the parasympathetic nervous system, and whether you're kind of in a state of fight or flight, or whether you're in a relaxed and calm state. And I was able to cobble together through all of these different interviews sort of a plan for myself that helped me ultimately deal with a lot of that sort of trauma, really develop my own emotional intelligence and emotional awareness far beyond what it had been before that, and understand, kind of get away from the emotional perfectionism of constantly thinking that I always needed to be happy, always needed to be in a positive state, which in many cases can kind of trigger a cycle of negative emotion, and really started to understand the science of kind of what happiness actually is, and how to cultivate sort of emotional peace and calm from a place of acceptance, as opposed to trying to kind of force it and paste a smile on your face and say, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy.
Yeah. Yeah, man, it's so true. I've been in similar situations. I think culturally, we live in a culture where we think, well, if you're in quotations a negative emotion, which we look at, sadness and grief like negative things, when in fact they can be very positive, right? Because they allow us to delve into ourselves and really allow us to come to a point emotionally where we either we need to ask for help, or we need to delve deeper into the scar in order to say, okay, what is this that's arising? So you went through this situation, you saw this loved one pass away in front of you, and you had a decision to make. And you said you run this podcast, the Science of Success, and it talks about psychology and decision making. How did you? Because sometimes it's hard to step out of those situations when you have grief and even shame and then maybe failure. It's hard to step out and kind of look at it objectively and say, okay, how am I gonna make my way out of this and become a better person and not just dwell here? Is there a process that you use? Did you journal? Did you biohack your body in any way? Talk about that process a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it was all of the above. I think it starts with the acceptance that negative emotions are okay. And I interviewed this guy named Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar, who teaches the most popular class in Harvard's history, and the class is on happiness. And he kind of digs into sort of what actually underpins happiness, what are kind of the things that create happiness in our lives. And one of the cornerstones of happiness is actually the realization that you can't always be happy, and the acceptance of negative emotions. And so I did a lot of work around that. I did a lot of journaling around that. And that was a big piece of it for me. And then kind of the second piece of it, and this is some of the stuff that Tal Ben-Shahar also talks about, but if you look at other scientists and researchers who write about things like anxiety and depression, they recommend many of the similar things. Really simple, one of the best interventions and things that kind of really helped me was just doing cardio every day.
Huge.
And it's interesting because different kinds of cardio create sort of different neurochemical balances in your brain. And so if you want to optimize for kind of feeling good, and building up those chemicals, you want to focus on more steady state cardio, which is not optimal for necessarily for weight loss or for other things. But when you're doing something like high intensity cardio, it's actually spiking the cortisol levels in your brain, which is sort of the stress hormone. And so that steady state cardio really helps build the sort of feel good neurochemicals much more effectively. So, cardio was super helpful. Getting a ton of sleep was a huge component of it for me, really prioritizing sleep. I interviewed this guy named Dr. Matthew Walker, who's one of the world's preeminent sleep experts. And he just can't say enough about how important sleep is and how you need to get 7 to 8 hours a night, and cutting it down to sort of 6.5 or 6 hours of sleep is not enough, and is like the number one predictor of all cause mortality, which is basically everything bad that can happen to you. And so sleep was a big piece. And then another component of it that was really beneficial for me was kind of going completely off of caffeine. And I'm back on to some degree. Like I'll have caffeine maybe in small doses once or twice a week, but I used to drink almost a pot of coffee a day. And I kind of started to think that some of the symptoms and things I was experiencing were also a result of adrenal fatigue. And so I cut caffeine, didn't have a drop of caffeine for about 3 or 4 months. And that really helped reset kind of my adrenal system, but also just my kind of mental state, where I'm not like hyped up on caffeine all the time, and instead really calm and more focused. And the funny thing about it, not like kicking caffeine definitely improved the quality of my sleep, and which sort of was a self-reinforcing positive cycle. But also like a little sort of side benefit of that was when I need caffeine now, let's say I really want like a boost of energy, I can have like a quarter of a cup of coffee and I will be like wired for like 3 hours. So it used to be where I could crush a coffee and not even feel any effects from it. And so resensitizing to myself was kind of a little side benefit. But I would say those were some of the major interventions, and just talking to experts, trying to figure out, what are the strategies that the research and evidence show actually work, and implementing. None of it's rocket science. Oh, one other thing, I don't know if I threw this out, but meditation obviously is one of the best tools as well. So just to kind of summarize, none of this is like crazy, like secret life hacks, right? Like,
right.
It's
exactly.
Like eat your vegetables, right? Like sleep, meditate, exercise and move your body, and then sort of journal and be aware of your emotional states and accept that it's okay to have negative emotions and negative emotional experiences.
Yeah. Wow. It's so true. It really is simple. I mean, you think about health and what your body needs, we have to recover, we have to have movement, and we have to have positive psychology, and it's like, you just listed all those things, in a nutshell. Basically, that's what you did. And it's really powerful, because I think oftentimes we talk ourselves out of these things. For instance, the caffeine thing's huge, because obviously coffee is trending like crazy. I mean, there's a coffee shop on every corner now, and socially, we get in these environments where we feel we need to have something like that. And you were able to, to kick it for a little while. And I think that's so important, because allowing yourself to lean down your regimen. So I think getting rid of things at times in our lives is so important, because it allows you to understand, okay, I'm in control and it's not in control of me. Whether it be trans fats that you're addicted to from going to, fast food restaurants, or the caffeine thing, it's really, really important. It was cool, Matt, because there's this piece of research out there that talks about how stretching will induce GABA, and GABA actually helps with restless leg syndrome. And actually caffeine is involved in all that. And I was having a couple of people coming to me with their arm would go numb at times. Like if you're laying on your side and sometimes your arm goes numb, or you can't, get your legs comfortable. Caffeine has a lot to do with that. And especially in our day and age, within our culture right now, caffeine is looked at, or coffee, I should say, is kind of has this like good for you type of sphere around it. And because it's served so much. And then like now we have, high altitude coffee, and like the soil, they talk about the soil, and there's brands coming out that are emphasizing coffee. But the fact is that caffeine can severely stunt neurotransmitters in the brain. And I think that, it's cool that you're going there in that way. And then, like you said, sleep is so huge, and knowing that your body needs recovery. Do you take any supplements in order to help improve your sleep? Do you do magnesium? Do you do chamomile tea, anything like that?
So I do take a number of supplements in the morning, but I don't currently take anything on a regular basis for sleep. Not opposed to it necessarily. Just if I really am like tired and can't fall asleep, sometimes I'll take like a melatonin supplement or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, for sleep specifically, no, I don't take any supplements.
Gotcha. And as far as you're constantly delving into psychology. You have psychiatrists and psychologists and experts on your show constantly. What would you say are keys to making good decisions? Like the science of psychology, I think that's huge, that you're constantly trying to achieve better decision making. So what would you tell the audience? What were your best strategies for helping you? What's helped you improve your decision making?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I've spent years and years of my life thinking about. And it started out a long time ago, even before the science of success existed. I was always a huge fan of Warren Buffett and kind of set out to read everything that had ever been written by Warren Buffett about Warren Buffett. And if anyone who studied him, even a little bit, will come across this guy again and again. This dude's named Charlie Munger.
Yeah, his right-hand man. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So he's Buffett's right-hand man. He's also a billionaire. Really, really crystal clear thinker. Probably one of the best thinkers I've ever encountered. And so I started getting really deep into Munger stuff too. And Munger writes and talks a lot about decision making. And through that journey, sort of the thing that has always captivated my mind is leverage, and how can I achieve more leverage on my time, more leverage on what I do, and how can I do stuff that's more high leverage, basically. Because if you look at people, I've studied and read biographies of Rockefeller, Carnegie, all of these different sort of billionaires, titans of industry, and all of these people who are, psychology experts, performance experts. And the biggest commonality I've seen is that top performers are more high leverage with what they do. And by high leverage, I mean when they do something or when they make a decision, it creates more results than somebody whose sort of thinking and decision-making framework has less leverage. And so to me, the best way to get leverage on your thinking and create more results for the same amount of time input, right? Because at the end of the day, I'll give you a really simple example that kind of demonstrates this principle. We'll use money. It doesn't necessarily have to be money. It could be any kind of result. But if you think about somebody like Warren Buffett or Bill Gates, right? These guys are making millions and millions of dollars, like billions of dollars a year, but even millions and millions of dollars a day.
Yeah.
And if you can't work 1,000x harder. Yeah. There's not enough hours in the day for you to work 1,000 times harder to make as much money as Bill Gates or Warren Buffett makes every single minute.
Right.
And so at some point, time and hard work stops becoming the sort of rate limiting factor. And it's a question of doing something that's more high leverage. And so to me, being high leverage is like my life's quest, basically. And I've essentially boiled it down to there's two key principles to being high leverage, one of which is making better decisions. And so I've spent a ton of time thinking about making better decisions, which is sort of, I call that the art of decision making. And there's a number of different components to it. But that's something that I've really drilled down and spent a ton of time thinking about and tried to collect kind of resources and strategies around how can I be a better decision maker so that I can create more leverage in my life and be a more high leverage thinker.
Interesting. And so what would you suggest? And I know there's a lot of different scenarios that could come into play here, because obviously for your own life, you're operating in a certain realm and I'm operating in a certain realm, et cetera. But what would you say on average a person can do, simple steps, in order to start operating in that high leverage category?
Yeah, there's a couple kind of strategies for making better decisions. And I would start with, one of the things that that I think is really important is focusing on things that never change over time, or that change very slowly over time. So if you think about how you spend your time today learning and improving, and if you don't currently have time that you carve out of your day to learn and improve, then that's like step zero. You know what I mean? So you need to be doing that. But if you're not, like, once you're doing that, right, a lot of people spend their time reading like articles and things that are very ephemeral. They read the news, they read the 8 strategies to improve your email click-through rates by 15%, like all these kind of tactical things. But the reality is, in 5 years, that article about email opt-in rates or click-through rates or whatever is going to be totally useless, right? The tactics in that thing are worthless. And so if you're spending your time filling your mind with tidbits and strategies and things that are that decay very rapidly over time, the next time you go back to learn, you're going to have to start with an empty bucket and then fill it again with new information. So if you're constantly focused on things that change rapidly, you're having to relearn again and again. Whereas if you focus on and try to master the principles that govern reality at sort of a deeper level, that knowledge compounds over time. And we all know how powerful compound interest is and the power of compounding. And you can harness the power of compounding to be a better decision maker by studying things that change very slowly over time. And that's where my interest in things like psychology came from. Yes, psychology changes. Yes, there's new research, there's new science. But if I master the principles of psychology and understand human behavior and what the sort of fundamentals of human behavior are, that cascades through everything that I do in my life. Right?
Wow.
Every business, life, whether I'm buying a house, whether I'm, negotiating for a new car, anything that I'm doing, that's how you get more high leverage, right? Is you study things that are going to cascade through and impact everything, and things that build on top of themselves.
Wow.
And so mastering the principles, right? Like mastering things like mathematics, mastering things like statistics, economics, psychology. If you start studying these disciplines of knowledge, as Charlie Munger calls them, mental models, which we can get into in a second. But if you start sort of studying these mental models and building a toolkit of the core ideas that govern reality, that's how you start to really build on knowledge, as opposed to having the knowledge you're studying constantly decay. And then you start leveraging compounding, and that's how you really, you sort of see these incremental changes. It's just like compound interest. It's these incremental changes in your thinking over the short and medium term. And then you'll wake up in 5 or 10 years and your thinking process will be so much further ahead of somebody that it'll be like there's a massive gulf and you won't even understand, how you got to where you are.
Yeah. Wow. Let's delve into that, because this is really interesting. So what did you call it? Mental what again? Charlie Munger's?
Yeah, mental models.
Mental models. Okay, so what is a mental model?
So a mental model sounds kind of confusing, complicated. The easiest way to think about it is basically a mental model is just a simple principle or idea that describes some sort of phenomenon in reality, right? So like compound interest is a mental model, right? The 80-20 principle is a mental model. Right. So things like if you're thinking about psychology, something like anchoring bias is a mental model. Right. So all of these different sort of just little principles, the way Munger describes it is basically, if you were to master the core ideas from the 101 textbook of any sort of field, those would all be kind of the mental models that govern that field. Right. So supply and demand from economics is kind of another example of a mental model. And I could give some. That's kind of at its core sort of what mental models are.
Okay, interesting. And so those are immovables. Those are pillars that are going to stay anchored, within a set parameter within a topic or a subject. And so
and they may change, right? But they're not. They change very slowly.
Gotcha.
And so you can build on top of them, right?
Right. Okay.
Like another good one is like the concept of natural selection from biology, right? It's a huge principle that explains a bunch of different phenomenon. Or like the prisoner's dilemma in game theory is another one that kind of can help explain a bunch of different things. And so the idea is like, if you start, and by the way, there's like lists, if you Google mental models, there's probably a half a dozen websites that have these really detailed lists of like hundreds and hundreds of mental models for those adventurous thinkers out there who want to go and study them. And I've compiled a bunch of them as well in sort of a guide the free guide that I'll tell you about in a minute. But
nice. Awesome.
The idea is if you start to collect these mental models and understand them, now when you encounter challenges or problems in your life, you can suddenly bring these mental models to bear and say, okay, this is a situation where we could really think about applying the 80-20 principle to, focus on these core pieces of our business and grow them. And while we're growing it, instead of, thinking about, okay, let's go read the tactic for like getting 15% more email conversions. If we understand the fundamental pillars of the book Influence by Robert Cialdini, which, is sort of the 6 principles that govern how psychology can influence human behavior, you can invent the marketing tactics that you want to use to influence people. And so if there's like a Ralph Waldo Emerson quote that I'm going to botch, but it's basically like, if you understand the principles, you can invent the tactics. But if you study the tactics, you'll find that they're constantly changing and you're constantly overwhelmed.
Right. Wow, that's huge. Yeah, this is really this sits at the core, right, of what we do as human beings, and the things that we decide to step into our lives. This is huge stuff. What would you say in your own life? The success, the failure, all the things that you've dealt with has been, I don't know, and maybe this is not the right terminology, but a core mental model in your own life that you've used a lot more than others. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, there's a number of them, but
yeah.
One that I definitely lean hard on is the 80-20 principle.
Okay. Gotcha.
And I mean, anybody who's read the 4-Hour Workweek or is a Tim Ferriss fan will understand, like, that book is fundamentally kind of a treatise about 80-20. And so that to me is like one of the core kind of governing principles of the way that I live my life. And I'm constantly thinking about how can I, really figure out how can I do less and achieve more? That's right. That's sort of the governing idea that drove me through the search for this broader theory of the art of decision making and making better decisions and becoming a high leverage thinker. And all these components kind of started with the 80-20 principle. And not only will I apply the 80-20 principle to my businesses and think about, okay, how can we leverage this phenomenon to figure out where we need to focus our marketing efforts or what customers we need to double down on, what customers we need to fire. But you can also, and I do probably once every, let's say 6 months, and I should do it probably once a quarter, but I probably do it once every 6 months. I'll kind of do a personal 80-20 analysis and figure out, both in life and in business, what's creating, let's say from a personal standpoint, what's creating happiness in my life? What activity, people, et cetera, are creating happiness, and what activities are reducing happiness. And so the law, the 80-20 principle, the law of the vital few, basically says usually there's a couple core things that are producing 80% of the results you want and 80% of the results you don't want. And so if you can just find those two or three things in your life that are creating unhappiness, and even just figure out a way to remove one of them, or hire an assistant to take care of that project, or fire that customer, or stop hanging out with that person, right?
Yeah.
That's going to have an outsized effect on your happiness and your well-being. And so that's a sort of a concrete example of starting to create more leverage in your life, because once you do that once, you've now distilled it down to kind of the fewer things that are creating more of what you want, right? But then you do that again, right? And then you do it again in 6 months. And so you're sort of creating this fractal application of the 80-20 principle, where you keep distilling down more and more and more of what you want and what's creating results, and getting rid of more and more of what you don't like and what's not creating results.
So Matt, this is a good segue. I love listening to people's morning routines. And because obviously you wake up very intentional about what you want to create in your life and your business. What does your morning routine look like? Walk us through what that looks like.
So my kind of daily architecture, which I think actually it's better to start in the evening because that informs a little bit what the morning looks like. But it starts, and actually really to start with the framework of a week, and then drill down into each day, because I think that'll give you the best sort of picture of how I think about it. But
Perfect.
It starts on Sunday, and Sunday morning, typically I'll spend an hour or two consolidating everything that's happened in the last week. And so there's kind of four main buckets that I'll go through. I'll go through my email and figure out, okay, what's kind of outstanding from the last week? What are the key things in there? I'll go through my calendar and see, what did I do last week? What do I have in this upcoming week? And then I'll go through my Evernote, which is like my Bible that I live pretty much my whole life by. And I'll consolidate basically every note that I created in the last week or two.
Now, do you do that on your phone or your computer?
My computer.
Okay.
And then I'll go through my sort of to-do list app, and I'll tie all those different things into, okay, what are the key things I need to accomplish this week? And I'll typically try to create kind of 1 to 3 sort of MITs, or most important tasks, for each day of the week. And so the goal is basically for each of those MITs, and that it may not always be a task. Like sometimes it's a question I want to journal on, which we'll get to in a second. But typically I'll have like 1 or 2 of those for each day of the week. And again, this is coming back and trying to apply the 80-20 principle. When I'm picking those tasks, I try to figure out what's going to be the most high leverage task out of all the things on my to-do list. You know, how can I pick the 1 or 2 things that are going to have the biggest possible impact? And I'm not dead on about that every single time, but just even the act of trying to do that, I'm able to whittle out some tasks. I'm able to kind of figure out, okay, this is where I want to really spend my energy, etc. So that starts on Sunday. Then we have sort of the MITs for each day. What I'll do typically at the end of a day is think about like a question or a challenge that I have, or a problem that I'm working on. And I'll try to write that down or say out loud, you know, how do I grow revenues by 20%? Or what do I do about this executive that we're having a problem with? Or, you know, just sort of say that question, let's say, 5 or 6 o'clock at the end of the workday. And then I try to completely kind of walk away from it. And I'll spend some time with my wife, relax, hang out, family time, go to sleep, get up in the morning. And the first thing I try to do in the morning is meditate before I get on my computer, before I get kind of sucked into the vortex of email and all this other stuff. I like to meditate to sort of crystallize my mind and start my day off in, you know, sort of an intentional way.
Gotcha. I want to pause you right there for a second, because a lot of times with meditation, you know, we get caught in our heads, you know, right? Like I remember when I first started to meditate, I would think about how I wasn't meditating. Like I would get caught in that little trap, you know, like I'm trying to be still and I'm trying to be silent and I'm thinking about not being still and not being silent, or my mind's racing. Is there something that you do to get yourself in that place? Because obviously when we wake up, right, our minds are already going into our day. Is there a technique you have?
You know, I mean, it's funny. I actually like to meditate when I have that pull of like, I got to go do stuff. I got to get stuff done, because to me, the act of sitting down and just meditating while I have that feeling is the work of building that muscle of meditation.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? True. Meditating when it's easy to meditate and you're feeling really chill doesn't build the muscle. Meditating when you feel like, I got to go, I got to do stuff, I got to get this, you know what I mean?
Yep.
That is how you get stronger and build the muscle of meditation. So I actually like to meditate when I have that feeling. But I also think, you know, there's a lot of people who say meditation is the return to breath, right? So it's not necessarily like your mind will wander. And if your mind wanders and you get distracted, it doesn't mean that you failed at meditation. It's the act of noticing that your mind has wandered and then returning back to breath that again kind of strengthens that meditation muscle. And so it's totally okay to be distracted and have the mind wandering. And that's a natural part of it. Yeah. And it's the act of returning back to that sort of that state of just observation and awareness that builds the muscle of meditation.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. Just wanted to hear what your technique was. So go ahead. So you were saying?
Yeah. So I'll meditate like first thing when I get out of bed, and then typically what I'll do is journal on something after that. And a lot of times it's the question that I kind of pose to myself that I'm looking for a breakthrough on, or looking for some kind of new insight. And the reason that I do that process is because there's a bunch of neuroscience behind what's called creative incubation, which is basically if you feed something into your subconscious mind and then you consciously focus elsewhere, the subconscious will start recombining, adding new ideas, merging things together, and working on that problem for you. And you're sort of leveraging all of the complex processing power of the subconscious mind when you consciously do something else. And so the whole idea of posing that question at the end of the day, right, and stepping away from it, spending time with my wife, relaxing, having a good time, sleeping, and meditating, all those things are kind of so that my subconscious can be churning away on this problem while I'm consciously doing something else. And then I try to sort of tap that and withdraw the insights that my subconscious has produced after that period of letting it sort of ruminate on that.
Very cool.
And it's the same idea as if you've ever been sort of like working on something or trying to solve a puzzle or in a video game and you're stuck on a level and you can't beat it. And then you go have lunch and you come back and you immediately solve it.
Right.
That's creative incubation, right? Your subconscious sort of solved the puzzle while you were gone, and then you come back and immediately know what to do.
Interesting.
So I try to harness that into a journaling practice after I meditate. And then I'll typically try to knock out my most important task. And then once I've done kind of all of those things, that's when I'll get sort of sucked into the more routine, email and other sort of things in the morning.
Yep. Gotcha. And is there, oh, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say one other thing, and I'm fortunate that I have a lot of control over my own schedule. And so I will typically try to structure my day to where I have no meetings before, let's say, sort of 11 or 12. Mm-hmm. And then that will be my morning time, which is sort of proactive, productive, high leverage time where I'm trying to create value and do things that are important, but not necessarily urgent.
Yep.
And then the afternoons from sort of, let's say, noon till 5 or 6 is when I typically have all my meetings. And so I'm more high energy in the morning. And so I try to bring my kind of A game for myself for the most high leverage stuff I can do, for that important stuff in the business, to sort of the thinking about the business at a higher level, thinking about strategy and all the kind of questions that a lot of people never have the time and energy to sort of zoom out and focus on. That's what I try to spend my most productive time in the day doing. And then the meetings in the afternoon are sort of just, I'm typically more low energy in the afternoons. And so I just have my meetings and knock out all that kind of stuff when I'm not at peak productivity. Gotcha.
Do you ever do any intermittent fasting in the morning, or do you have a shake that you go to?
I don't do IF. I've experimented around with it, but I find that it makes me kind of, it sort of triggers my fight or flight response to some degree, because you're literally starving. And so it seemed to, and this is just my personal experience, sort of increase my overall anxiety levels.
Yep.
So I decided not to do it after a couple months of trying it out. I'll typically just have like a protein shake in the morning. I do either like Sun Warrior, which is like this vegan protein that's really tasty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or Tim Ferriss was talking about this new protein. I forget the name of it that I just ordered that I'm trying out now. But it'll just do like, protein powder, maybe a little bit of peanut butter, banana, maybe some spinach, maybe, something else.
Yeah.
Nothing crazy, just protein shake in the morning for breakfast typically.
Yeah. Okay. Have you heard of the cricket protein?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I've had some.
You had some?
Yeah.
My body actually did very well on that for a while. It was a guy that sponsored one of our events. He sent me some of it, and I just had never had something like that before. But I've had a ton of athletes that have commented on how well they do on it. There's a really high amino acid count in a lot of it. And so that's the reason why I started taking it, because my body really thrives off of amino acids, especially when I'm, doing intense workouts. If I have like some intense paddleboard sessions through the week, I can really, really feel my energy levels start to lower. Is there something in your diet? Are there foods in your diet, Matt, that you just don't do without? Like, hey, I function really well off these types of foods.
Nothing in particular, I mean, I just try to, being in the restaurant and the food world, sometimes it's a battle to try and eat well all the time. So my constant struggle is, I'm trying to eat really healthfully as much as I can, because I'm going to have to do a food tasting every now and then or something.
Right.
Brisket and barbecue and biscuits and all kinds of stuff. And so I try to kind of constantly wage that battle.
Yep, for sure. So what, kind of dropping into mindset, what's something that you think about, Matt, that helps you maintain a high level of performance?
What's something that I think about? I mean, to me, the overarching principle that sort of governs how I think broadly is how can I be more high leverage, right? So I'm always thinking about tools, strategies, behaviors that I can plug and play into what I'm doing that will increase the amount of leverage that I have on the time and energy that I invest into any project.
Okay. And do you visualize? Do you have pictures that you actually see when you want to, perform at a higher level?
I don't currently. I used to
Okay.
do a meditation that had visualization as kind of a component of it, but I don't currently do any kind of visualization.
Gotcha. What are you passionate about as an entrepreneur that our heroes out there could benefit from?
Interesting. Tell me give me some more clarity on that one.
So yeah, of course. So what is maybe it's the realm of decision making and psychology.
Yes.
Or is there
Okay. Yeah.
something,
Yeah.
or something in business? Like, is there something new that you're delving into that you're passionate about? You're like, hey, listeners could really benefit from this.
Totally get it. Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
mean, I think to me that, the thing that I've spent basically my adult life focused on is how can I produce more results with less energy, time, focus, et cetera. Right.
Yeah.
AKA how can I be as high leverage as possible? And I've created, that's sort of the ethos that fundamentally guides the science of success. And a lot of the interviews we have kind of dig into the pillars and the tools that underpin that. But I've also, I created essentially sort of a free guide called 4 Steps to Making Better Decisions that delves into mental models and has a ton of them in there, and like lists of mental models and all kinds of different things. It goes a lot deeper into what I talked about on here about how anybody listening can basically implement that stuff and start to become a more high leverage thinker. So that could, that's sort of a tool that listeners could check out. And I'm happy to, share the link or whatever to get that.
That'd be great. So do you want to share it now?
Sure. Yeah. So you can go to successpodcast.com/better, successpodcast.com/better. And you get the free guide, 4 Steps to Making Better Decisions, which really goes a lot deeper into a lot of the decision-making stuff that I talked about. And to me is kind of the core of being a high leverage thinker.
Wow, that's awesome. And for everybody out there, by the way, everything that Matt's talked about from the books to the people are all going to be in my show notes. So if you're taking notes, great. If not, you can go to my show notes. So we're going to do a rapid fire round here, Matt. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. What creates the most peace in your life?
My wife.
Nice. What helps you enter flow state or the zone?
So it's funny. I believe in this principle that sort of action creates motivation and not the other way around. So for me, it's just finding something that I can do to get started. And once I start in any way, like I don't wait to get motivated to start. I just try to start with the simplest thing, even if it's like cleaning off my desk.
Yeah.
And that just snowballs into more and more and more. I'm sure everyone's had an experience where it's like, all right, I'm just going to clean up this one thing. And then like you wake up like an hour and a half later and you've cleaned like half your house and you're like, oh, I feel super productive. Like what else can I do? So to me, action creates motivation, not the other way around. And so just doing something, starting is what puts me into a flow state.
Love it. What was the last habit you formed and why?
The last habit that I formed. So this is sort of a new thing that I've implemented into my morning routine, but I just got back recently from a Tony Robbins event. And one of the things that I kind of took away is that I want to really get more creative and think about how I can be more resourceful and kind of break through challenges in my life. And so to me, I've sort of modified my daily routine slightly, and the journaling that I'm doing in the morning now typically is a sort of a creativity journal where I just try to brainstorm like 10 ideas that I can do to improve my business or make money in some way. And I know most of them are going to be junk and I'm going to throw them out, but the goal is basically just constantly be building that creativity muscle so that I can be forming kind of better and better ideas and better ways to think about opportunities within my business and even outside of it that I'm currently not thinking about.
Awesome. So normally this question is what's one book, but I'm really interested. I'd love to get as many books as you can throw at us because you've obviously done a lot of reading within the realm of decision making and psychology. What books do you recommend to our heroes? You can choose as many as you want, but just what books have impacted you greatly in your life?
Yeah, I'll give 3 or 4 books.
Okay.
Number one, and this is not directly related to what we've been talking about, but it sort of indirectly underpins a lot of it, which is the book Mindset by Carol Dweck. Had a tremendous impact on me and the way I think. And she's interviewed, she's researched on hundreds of thousands of people over 30 years. It's like one of the most robust findings in the science of psychology, all about how to sort of what underpins the psychology of people who succeed and grow and thrive, and people who plateau and self-sabotage and sort of never get what they want. And she's also a previous guest on the Science of Success. And that book is one of my favorite books of all time, completely changed the trajectory of my life. Another book, Art of Learning by Josh Waitzkin. Huge fan of that book. He's like a 10-time national chess champion, then went into martial arts, ended up winning the world championship in Tai Chi push hands 2 separate times. And then now he's kind of a performance coach for hedge fund managers and peak performers. And he shares a ton of the kind of principles that underpin how he thinks about growing, learning, and performing in the book, The Art of Learning. And that to me is like, I literally have a mind map of my favorite lessons from that book, like pasted up on my wall. Wow. And I look at it every single day.
That's awesome.
So those two of the most impactful books I've ever read. A third would be, if you want to kind of go deeper into the art of decision-making and making better decisions, is a book called Poor Charlie's Almanac, which is a short biography of Charlie Munger that's maybe like 20 or 30 pages. And then the rest of it is a deep explanation of what he calls worldly wisdom, which is basically this whole idea of building a toolkit of mental models and better understanding reality, and sort of learning how to be a better thinker and how to be a more high leverage person. And so that is an incredible book that kind of can start you on the journey of better decision making. You have to kind of adjust yourself to the way that Munger writes and speaks, because he's kind of has a unique way that he communicates. But to me, that book really, really transformed the way that I think.
And when you say that, do you mean that it's more of it's not like a grab the book and go head out to the beach and do a little light reading? Is it more of a heavier?
Exactly.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. It's not crazy heavy. It's heavier than your average book. There's a sort of a spiritual sequel to that book called Seeking Wisdom by Peter Bevlin. And that book is about 350 pages, and it's just like detailed descriptions of mental models, and it's maybe like 3 or 4 pages on each mental model. And that book is the kind of book that like you could read like 4 pages of it and it'll take you like half an hour. But it's literally the most information dense book I've ever read. But I would like reading that without reading Poor Charlie's Almanac would be like reading a book in Chinese without Chinese. And so I would say those 3 books are a great starting point to kind of dig into any of this stuff.
That's awesome, man. It's going to give us a lot to chew on there. And lastly, if you could pick one action step for our listeners to take from this call, what would it be?
I would say spend some time thinking about, how you could be more high leverage in your life. Maybe journal on that. Do the journaling strategy that I talked about in this episode. So tonight at the end of the day, write down, handwrite, how can I be more high leverage in my life? ? And then let go of that question, and then come back the next morning. And before you start your workday, before you start your email, spend 15 or 20 minutes and just journal about that question and see what kind of answers you come up with.
Wow. I love it, Matt. Man, this has been, I could go another hour with you, by the way, and maybe we will do another episode on more of the nitty gritty of decision-making and psychology. But I just want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day, speaking life into me, into our listeners, and really just showing up the way you do. If the audience wants to learn about you, where can they go to find out more?
The best place to go is successpodcast.com. That's kind of where everything about the show is. And, again, if you want to dig into decision-making, you can get the 4 steps to making better decisions at successpodcast.com/better.
Awesome. And I will attest to that. I've been on successpodcast.com. It's amazing. Please go check it out, everybody. It's going to change your life, change the way you see yourself and the way you make decisions, et cetera, et cetera. So Matt, once again, thanks so much for being on, brother.
Well, Matt, thanks for having me on the show. It's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely. It really has. And to everybody out there, don't forget that you are already superhuman. It's inside of you. Make good decisions today. Make sure that you show up, That's the first step in everything. Just show up and make sure that you're constantly achieving learning, knowledge, and proactive steps in order to be a better version of yourself. Thanks everyone for joining us. We will see you next time.